So, assalamu alaikum, everyone. So, last week we started with the introduction of the Tafseer course, and we're a third way through before we even start Surah Al-Fatiha. I know you just want to get straight into Tafseer of Surah Al-Fatiha, but it's really important that we all have a really good detailed understanding of the ins and the outs and the reason why the Quran was even revealed and how come it wasn't revealed in one go, and how did people react to the Quran being revealed, and what was the environment and the social situation at the time when the Quran was revealed. So inshallah, we have just this lesson and next week to give you a full in-depth introduction before we actually start with the Fatiha. Now, when we start doing the Fatiha, it's all going to be on PowerPoint. So the verses are going to be on the board. It's not going to just be like this picture. It's going to be on the board. You'll have it in Arabic and you'll have a few dot points. I'm not going to be putting the whole lecture, on the PowerPoint, but what I do require of you is you either can print it out, or I would really suggest is that you get a book and you actually copy out whatever is written on the board. So I might be talking for about 5 minutes, but on the board will just be the verse, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim in Arabic, the meaning of it, and about 5 points of what I'm going to be talking about that for the next 5 minutes, and then I'll move on. It gives you enough time to write it down. This will help you with your handwriting and to inshallah memorize. Okay. So last week we talked a little bit about the social environment at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Now we are going to look at how the Quran practically challenged the Arabs' literary skills by producing a book that far outdid their works of art. Okay, so at that time, the Arabic language features used in the Quran contained a lot of poetic rhymes. That's why if you notice, if you open up a lot of the short surahs of the Quran, even sometimes the longer ones, you'll notice that they're very, there's a certain rhythm. It's like a poem. There's a lot of rhyming verses. Sometimes it makes it a little bit easier to memorize, sometimes a little bit harder, but that rhyming rhythm was very, very popular with poems in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Quran actually contained, poetic rhymes, and there was a rhythm, and there was a style that was similar to how a poem is presented in the time of the Arabs. Remember, they loved poems. So when the Quran was revealed, they saw this, this piece of writing that far outdid their poems. Yet despite its, very simple poetic style, which captured the hearts and the minds of both the Muslims and the non-Muslims, the disbelievers, they were not able to produce a single chapter or even 10 verses similar to the Quran. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually challenged them. Produce a Quran similar. They couldn't. Okay, produce a chapter. Just a chapter. They couldn't. Okay, produce 10 verses similar to the Quran. They couldn't. And they honestly tried. They actually tried to write down that contained the same rhythm and pattern and grammar as the Quran, and they were going crazy. They could not do it. So if the Quran was really, man-made, wouldn't it just be so easy to reproduce? And till now, we have people sitting in their garage all day trying to reproduce just sort of just a small surah that matches the rhyme, the rhythm, and the grammar of the Quran, and they're not able to do it. In fact, they were aware of its power, of how it bedazzled their mind, and they actually considered the Quran to be a form of sorcery. They couldn't understand what else it could possibly be that was so beautiful. So they literally just said, it must be witchcraft. Like, it just must be witchcraft. That's why it sounds so beautiful and it's attracting our attention. It must be witchcraft. They had no other, way to go around it. And to give you an example of this, okay, imagine this. Now, close your eyes and imagine this. Once the Prophet ﷺ, he was praying and he was reciting Surah An-Najm. The word Najm means the star. And he was reciting this before a big assembly of the Quraysh. Okay, now this chapter actually revolves around the Day of Judgment, and it gives a really vivid image of that scary day. I would really recommend open up to the Quran, to Surah An-Najm. It's not very long, and read it. And you will actually cry, because you will imagine that day, on the day of judgment, and the screaming and all the things that are happening around you, you actually feel like you're there. So at the end of that surah that the Prophet ﷺ was reciting in his salah, there is a verse of prostration. Just in case you don't know what that means, there are about 14 or 15 surahs in the Quran where there is a verse where when you hear it, you need to make a sajda, okay? And you say a certain dua. You don't have to have wudu. You can be in your menses. It's not a type of salah, so you don't necessarily have to be facing the qibla. And you just make one sajda and say a particular dua, and that's it, okay? So it was a verse of prostration. So it's a place where the Muslims, when they hear this verse, they make sujood. And we said there's like 14 or 15 places in the Quran that have this prostration. So that verse has mention of the submission of Allah. All these verses that have a sajda tilawa, they're all talking about fasjudu, worship Allah, make sujood, and therefore it would only be appropriate to prostrate to Allah, like us saying to Allah, we have submitted to you and we're prostrating to you. So what happened? The Muslims all fall down in prostration, naturally, as they would usually do so when they hear a verse of prostration. And what was so astonishing is that guess who also prostrated? Guess who? The non-Muslims. And he included some of the chiefs that held a really high status, and they were actually the enemies of Islam. So the effect that the recitation of the Quran that it had on them was very overwhelming. Ladies, if your microphone is unmuted, please mute it, because it just there's no with this lesson there's no need to talk at all, so you can just be listening in. So please make sure you mute microphone. So the effect that this recitation of the Quran that it had on them, it was really overwhelming, and they couldn't help but make sujood. Now, some of them made sujood that were eagerly watching. There were some people that were onlookers that didn't make sujood. They were just like looking for a bit from far. So those onlookers, they were shocked, and they assumed that the non-Muslims who were their friends that had just prostrated has just accepted Islam. So the non-Muslims that had made the prostration were shocked at their action, and they quickly got up. They couldn't understand, what did we just do? What did I just do? They thought that maybe they were overtaken by witchcraft or magic at that instant. And that was why at the time, a lot of non-Muslims would walk around with their fingers in their ears whenever they heard the Quran, because they were so scared that the Quran was going to enter their heart and that they would actually accept Islam. So, the topic of Arabic and how the Quranic verses are presented in such a perfect way may not be something that we completely understand and appreciate, because we don't actually speak the language of the Quran. Even the Arabs themselves, including myself, I'm Syrian, I'm an Arab, and I will admit that the Arabic that is in the Quran, it's not the same Arabic that we use to speak. The formal Arabic, it contains a lot of grammar that we don't actually use when speaking in slang or colloquial Arabic. There are many words in the slang that is in the formal Arabic. Like there are a couple of words here and there, like bala, and there are some words obviously, but it isn't enough to help you understand the Quran completely. But it just kind of like whets your appetite. It gives you a brief understanding. So I can't say that you are not advantaged. No, being an Arab around the Quran does give you a bit of an advantage. Similarly, if you lived in an Arabic country and you know how to read and write Arabic, you are advantaged in reading the Quran. You won't be able to know how to read the Quran with tajweed, but you're advantaged. Okay, but does that mean that you understand the Quran completely? If you're an Arab that was raised in an Arab country, do you think that you completely will understand the Quran and how to read it with tajweed? The answer is no. The answer is absolutely no. And in fact, I met some sisters. One of them, a couple of years ago, she she lived in an Arab country her whole life, and then she said, you know what, it's about time that I learn how to read Quran with tajweed. That's it. You know what, I'm gonna get an assessment. She did an assessment, and they said to her, you're gonna have to start at level 1. She's like, what? Level 1, like alif ba ta tha jim ha kha, you want me to start at level 1? They said, yeah, because the way you say the letters are not correct, the name of the letters you're not saying correct. So she was actually shocked. She was like, I can read a newspaper in Arabic, but for me to start my Quran journey, I had to start right from the beginning, because even though it gave her a little bit of an advantage, but it does not mean that you can read the Quran with the same sounds of the Prophet ﷺ when he would recite in Quran. As with all languages over time, you will notice that words, they change, and the words, they present new meanings, and they're no longer used or understood by average people. That's why the English, Shakespeare English, it's not like the formal English that we know today. No one in this day and age speaks Shakespeare English, okay? It's just unheard of. However, the Quran, it contains the Arabic language that is studied and learned and understood by everyone that wants to understand its meaning. And the meaning of the Arabic words in the Quran, they will never change in meaning. That's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he promised that it would be preserved. So over time, other languages, they present new meanings. This word meant this, but now it means this. For example, when you say, I'll shout you, it means like, I'll pay for you, right? But ages ago, no one used that word, I'll shout you, okay? And in about 50 or 60 years, there's going to be another word that means I'll shout you. It's not going to be shout. It's going to be something else. So words, they present different meanings. But in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, those were the words in the Quran. Until now, it's still preserved. The books of grammar that explains the grammar of the Quran are still available now. And the exact meanings of every word has not changed. Okay? Ibil means camel, and Ibil meant camel 1400 years ago. But nothing has changed. That's what's so amazing about the Quran. Now, when the Quran needed to make up a rumor about what Muhammad ﷺ was spreading of the Quran, they wanted to say that it was false. Okay? So they said, by Allah, look, his words are sweet. They're well-based, they're fruitful, and what you are repeating is established to be false. Yet the most proper thing that you can say about him is that he's a magician who has brought magical words which he separates between brothers, spouses, and families. So they couldn't deny that the words that he was presenting them with was sweet and beautiful and rhythmic and sounded so beautiful and grammatically correct. But they said, what we can say is that don't follow this Quran no matter how good it sounds, because if you hear it, you're going to be breaking up with your spouse, breaking up with your family, with your brother. It's going to cause problems. And this narration, it shows how the disbelieving Arabs of the Prophet's time, they couldn't fathom how Muhammad was bringing such beautiful lines of this so-called poetry, which penetrated the heart and the mind, and they referred to the Quran to as magic words. So they actually referred the Quran to magic words because they knew that it had an effect on people's heart that they couldn't understand. So since we can't explain it, it must be magic. So keep in mind that Muhammad ﷺ at this point was illiterate. What does illiterate mean? It means that someone is ummi. Ummi means they don't know how to read or write. Okay? So he was not given the skill of reading and writing. And Allah decreed that although the Prophet ﷺ, he highly encouraged the Muslims to learn how to read and write, he himself couldn't read. This fact further proves that Muhammad ﷺ could not have authored the Quran, which was actually said about the Prophet. Until now, people still make up rumors that the Prophet wrote the Quran. But how? If he was known that he was illiterate, how could he author a book like this when he didn't even have reading and writing skills? And everyone that knew him from birth up until his death, the Muslim and the non-Muslim, they all knew that he couldn't read and write, So the fact that the Quran has not been corrupted, unlike any other book of the past, was promised by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As Allah said, إِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا الذِّكْرَ وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. We revealed the reminder, meaning the Quran, and verily we are its guardians. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with all other books of the past, the Torah, the Injil, the Zabur, all of those other books, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't take it upon himself to guard it. He actually left it in the hands of people to guard it. But just with the Quran, he took it upon himself to guard the Quran. This is why all the older books, old revelations that we believe in, they have been corrupted, adulterated. There may be some truths in some of them, but we don't know which ones are truth and which ones are false. And obviously the ones that are just completely, you can really tell that are incorrect are obviously 100% incorrect. But there are some things in the old books, like, the 10 commandments that, don't steal, don't lie. There is some good in them, but we can't say that this is the revelation of Allah, the book of Allah. We can't say it because it has been corrupted and played around with so much. But with the Quran, it's been proven in history that those words in the time of the Prophet ﷺ till now have been preserved. Okay? The Quran is the only book in the world that is memorized word by word, cover to cover, in the hearts of individuals around the world. And actually, it should be the goal of every Muslim to want to memorize the whole Quran, to be a hafiz, not just only a hafiz, a person who implements the Quran. You should have that in your heart. So when you learn how to read Quran, your intention should be, I want to read the Quran, I want to memorize the Quran, I want to implement the Quran. I want the Quran to be my part of my daily life. I want to be a walking Quran. This is what every Muslim should have in their heart. In fact, all of the copies of the Quran, imagine if they were to disappear, it would be reproduced with ease. And the most recent discovery of the oldest Quran was discovered in Birmingham University, and that Quran was aged 1,307 years old, and it proves that the Quran has not changed over time, just as Allah promised, because when they looked into that Quran, they found that it was the same as the Quran that we have now. That's almost 1,400 years ago. I think that's a very, very strong evidence. The Meccans, they kept asking the Prophet ﷺ to bring forth a miracle to prove his prophethood. Now, although there are miracles that the Prophet ﷺ brought, and they were witnessed by everyone, the main miracle that he brought was the Quran. And I'll explain that in depth more, but I explained it a lot long ago in regards to the reproduction of a verse. He kept, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kept, challenging them, saying, good, produce a Quran if you are able to. And just the fact that they couldn't is proof that it was a miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the Prophet came with other miracles. The Quran was not the only miracle. Every prophet came with a miracle. So with other miracles that the Prophet brought, the disbelievers, they always argued that he must be a magician, okay? You're capable of tricking our eyes or knowing the unseen by communicating with the jinn. However, with the Quran, with its grammatical style, it was something that they just couldn't deny. Now, the Prophet ﷺ did come with other miracles. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Maybe some of them you haven't heard of. I'll give you one. The disbelievers, they challenged Muhammad to bring a miracle, and on the spot, Muhammad pointed towards the moon, and by Allah's permission, it split into two. Now, after it stayed in that state for a while, it went back to its original state, and the disbelievers witnessed this with their own eyes, and it's recorded. And the only thing that they could say is, yeah, it must be magic. No, we can see that you've split it in two, but obviously you've tricked our eyes. So that was recorded that it took place. The second example is the journey of the Isra wal Mi'raj, which is a night journey that the Prophet ﷺ took with his physical body from Mecca to Jerusalem. So the disbelievers, they laughed at his claim. He said that he took this journey, and they just laughed at him. However, Muhammad was able to accurately describe the Aqsa Mosque to those who had been there before, and it matched their description. And prior to this ascension, where he ascended to the heavens, the Prophet ﷺ had never actually traveled to Jerusalem. He had never left the city. And everyone was aware of that. He had actually never traveled outside of the city before. He also described some of the travelers that he saw that were on their way to Mecca, and with the goods that they were carrying and whatnot. And a few days later, those actual travelers, they reached Mecca, and he explained everything, like what were they wearing, what were they carrying, what stocks, what route they were taking. Like, it was explained very, very precisely. Even the description of the Aqsa Mosque, he even described the windows, how many windows, the shape, everything was described, so precisely. And one more miracle that I mentioned is that on the day of Hudaybiyah, which is a treaty, the people became really, really thirsty. And after completing the wudu, the ablution, the people had rushed towards the Prophet ﷺ, and he asked what was the matter with them. And they replied that they had no water, not enough, water for ablution or drinking, except a little pot of water. So, it wasn't enough for all of them to make wudu and all of them to drink. It was clearly not enough. So the Prophet ﷺ placed his hand into the pot, and water started to flow from his fingertips like a spring. And everyone drank, and everyone performed wudu that day. So they both drank and they made wudu, and they were full, and their thirst was quenched. And this is recorded. Okay, sometimes people need to see miracles in order to strengthen their faith, and that's why prophets brought these miracles to help prove their prophethood to people that denied the truth. Okay, sometimes we ask to see something not because we don't believe it, because we want our iman to be strong. With, for example, Prophet Ibrahim said, "Ya Allah, show me how you bring the dead back to life." Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to him, "Don't you believe?" But although Allah knows the answer to his question, he said, "No, but so that my heart can be more content." And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed him to, bring the dead back to life. It was the birds, chop them up, put them on different mountains and call them, and they will be gathered and their soul will be placed back into their bodies, and they came back to life. So when the Prophet Ibrahim asked for that, it was not out of disbelief. It wasn't out of disbelief. But the Quraysh, they didn't ask for these miracles because they want their iman to be even stronger. No, it's because they disbelieve. So at times, prophets need to produce miracles to show these disbelieving people that, they are a prophet. So, these are some of the miracles that they brought out. So as mentioned earlier, the Quran was revealed gradually over 23 years. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ became a prophet at the age of 40, and he died at 63. So there was 23 years, the whole time, where the Quran was being, revealed bit by bit. So the disbelievers, they kept asking, like, out of mockery, why the Quran why couldn't it just be revealed all at once? Like, why couldn't this holy book, if it's so true, why couldn't it all come down, on gold papers and in a thick book, or in one go? Now, I want to ask you a question to answer this question, okay? If you were a child and you didn't even know how to make a peanut butter sandwich, just say you're 13 years old, and your mother said to you, now you need to pack your own lunchbox, you need to do your own washing and your ironing, and that's it. I've had enough. You're making your own dinner. You got to cut the grass and a whole lot of other things that you've never done before. Now, would you do it? Would you feel overwhelmed? How would you feel? Like, maybe your neighbor that's 13 years old, they know how to do all that stuff. They know how to cook. They know how to clean. They know how to cut the grass. But because you've never done it before, it becomes really, really overwhelming. It's like if someone, if they're not used to cleaning, okay, then all of a sudden they live alone. Okay, they're used to someone always, having a maid or someone for them. And then all of a sudden they're gone to travel overseas and they're living alone. Now they have to cook and clean for themselves. If they're not used to it, they'll really struggle. But if at home they knew how to cook and knew how to clean and they occasionally did it, when they do live on their own, it's not such a traumatizing hardship. Okay, that's why it's really good that even if you love doing everything for your children from your heart, it's really good to train them to have the skills to know how to do everything, and sometimes let them do it even if you know how to do everything and you're fine to do everything, so that they can have the skills so that when they get older and go into the real world, they're able to do everything. So even if you knew how to do it, though, if you're not used to doing it much, you're going to find it very, very overwhelming. So now let's go back to the Quran being revealed in stages. Imagine if within 1 year of the Quraysh learning about Muhammad's prophecy, imagine if it was revealed that now all these laws came down. Now they had to wear hijab. They weren't wearing hijab their whole life. Now they're not allowed to mix with men, but their whole life they were mixing with men all the time. Imagine now they had to stop eating forbidden meats and stop drinking alcohol, and having relationships outside of your marriage that are prohibited. Imagine if now you have to not take riba, and now you have to pass the whole month of Ramadan, pray 5 times a day, and the men couldn't wear silk or gold, and the women were not allowed to pluck their eyebrows or beautify themselves when they leave the house. Now, imagine if all these laws that we know about were all revealed at once. Would anyone even bother looking about Islam? Like, would they even bother looking into Islam? No, they would not. That's why when you're teaching someone about Islam first, you do not approach them in, yes, if you become a Muslim, the first thing you need to learn is, okay, Islam revolves around wearing hijab, not committing zina, and you have to stop plucking your eyebrows. This is not like the way to approach a non-Muslim. The way you approach a non-Muslim is via tawheed. You have to just teach them about Islam via tawheed, the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the belief in the prophets. And that's what the revelation was about all in Mecca for years. There were no laws in regards to you're not allowed to do this and do this. Everything was about tawheed, the belief in the prophets that came. Otherwise, they would be so overwhelmed with the prohibitions that they would be even too scared to check what this faith is all about. And this is one of the reasons why Quran was revealed gradually, because the revelation brought about laws, and the people weren't ready for those laws from the beginning. They needed to learn first about the Day of Judgment, about Allah's oneness, about giving up some bad habits like burying their children alive. And then the laws, they came later. The laws, the majority of the laws, ladies, other than Salah, were revealed in Medina many, many years later. It was not revealed that women had to wear hijab and fast a month of Ramadan and strict laws of riba. That was not revealed at the beginning, because the most important thing is that you teach someone about tawheed, belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why if you're teaching someone about Islam, even if they are a Muslim, you need to first teach them, okay, how's your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What is your belief? Because don't assume that every person that is born in a Muslim family, they automatically are born with this amount of knowledge. Not every parent has taught their child about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What do you believe about Allah? Do you know about Allah's names and his attributes? So once they learn about Allah, then you teach them about the Day of Judgment, accountability, the day where everyone needs to pay for their sins, everyone is on their own. Then once they learn about that and the stories of the prophets and the message that they came and their iman is strong, then it will be easy for them to take on laws. Okay? So let's just look at the example of alcohol. The Arabs at the time, okay, in Mecca, imagine companions that were not Muslims yet. They were heavy drinkers of alcohol. They would get so drunk, and alcohol was their water on the jug or their Coke at the table. You know how people, every time we eat dinner, we always have like a jug of water, sometimes 2 jugs of water. Some people, they have other drinks on the table. So imagine their jug of water was alcohol. And even though they knew it wasn't good, and they knew that it led them to doing silly things when they got drunk, but nevertheless, they kept drinking, just like people still till this day now, the non-Muslims, they know what drinking alcohol does. They know that drink driving causes death on the road. They know that drinking causes rapes, illegitimate births. People's reputations are lost due to doing crazy things that they do when they're drunk. But people still drink. They know it's bad, but people still drink because they have a bad habit. Just like if you ask someone that smokes or they swear, right? If you ask them, is this good? Like if you ask them, like seriously, is smoking good? They'll say no. I say to them, would you like your daughter or son to smoke? No, absolutely not. So why are you smoking? Oh, it's just such a bad habit. It's really hard to give up. Okay, you're smoking. You swear. You say F words. Okay, or you scream at your parents. You say to them, would you like your children to say all these F words and this, that? No. Would you like your children to scream at you when you become old? No. Why are you doing it? Oh, it's a bad habit. It's a bad habit. So when you look at these companions, they had a really bad habit of drinking alcohol. Even though they knew it was bad, they were very, very attached to alcohol. Okay, so imagine if a verse came down after they've been drinking their whole life and they're 40 years old, alcohol is forbidden. They'll say, oh, we'll never give up alcohol. We will never become Muslim. This is what they would do. So slowly verses were revealed that began, at the beginning to gradually prohibit alcohol. For example, Allah says, "O you who believe, approach not prayers with a mind befogged," meaning drunk, "until you understand what you say." So at the beginning, it was allowed to keep drinking alcohol, but if you came to Salah, you had to be sober. You were not allowed to come in a state of drunkenness. So it made it a little bit hard because they had to make sure that they had finished drinking alcohol and completely the alcohol had to be out of their system before Salah time. So they started to let me cut down a little bit. You know how you've got people in Ramadan that don't smoke? So, they try before Ramadan to kind of cut down, or, coffee, you want to cut down on the caffeine, you try to get yourself ready. This is what the gradual prohibition of alcohol did. It was getting their body used to not having it so much. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala eventually revealed a verse saying, "O you who believe, intoxicants and gambling of dedication of stones and divination by arrows are an abomination of Satan's handiwork. So give up such abomination that you may prosper." What this is saying is that, "O you who believe, these actions like gambling and alcohol drinking is shaitan's work. So give it up." So, it couldn't be said to them, give it up straight away. Okay, so Sharia had to be revealed gradually to give people time to process and comprehend and accept the law, and then adapt their lifestyle to suit the laws being revealed. And this is all part and parcel of revelation being revealed slowly. This is why the Quran had to be revealed slowly. It could not all be revealed in one go because the people, their iman wasn't strong enough. Maybe it was strong enough for a few, maybe for the Prophet ﷺ, for Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, a couple of the companions who were so loyal. But the majority of people, especially new Muslims or people that hadn't even accepted Islam, if all these laws if they were bombarded with all these laws, it would become very, very overwhelming. That's why whenever you are coming into Islam, or becoming more religious, try taking little steps. I always recommend that. Try to not take these really big steps, because when you take these really big steps, what happens is you become overwhelmed. I'll give you a practical, inshallah, I'll try to think of a practical example. If you're not used to cleaning, okay, you're not used to cleaning, okay, and then you say, that's it, I'm gonna go on a big spring clean and every day I'm gonna do 3 hours of cleaning. What's gonna happen at the end of the week? You're like, you know what, stop this, I'm just gonna live in a pigsty, I can't do this. But if you just say, look, I'm gonna clean 10 minutes a day, and then after a week you make it 20 minutes, and after another week you make it 30 minutes, and then your body gets used to cleaning, so it becomes second nature and a habit. They say it actually takes, just for your side notes, they say it takes 3 months for something to become a habit. So if you want to be able to pray 5 times a day, you need to be able to do it continuously without not doing it once for 3 months, and then after that 3 months, you know, you'll find it so much easier and it's not such a struggle. But you actually have to commit to it for 3 months. It's like attending a class. If you start enrolling in a class and then you attend 1 week and then you get lazy a week and you attend 2 weeks, then you get lazy a week, it's going to be really hard to actually make this a habit where you enjoy it and you love it and it's second nature. The only way is that you have to just do it and you have to commit to it, rain, hail, or shine, no matter what, I'm going to stick to it, and then eventually it becomes a piece of cake. It's not even hard anymore. So the Prophet ﷺ, he spent 13 years being a prophet in Mecca and the remaining 10 years in Medina, and he passed away in Medina. Now, out of the 114 surahs of the Quran, 86 of these chapters are classified Meccan, while 25 of these are classified Medinan. Now, what does Meccan or Medinan mean? Okay, because if you open up the Quran, if you're well acquainted with the Quran and you know how to open it up and read, and you'll see, you know, this one is Meccan, this one is Medinan, it will state if it's Meccan or Medinan. And a lot of people think that if it's Meccan, it means it was revealed in Mecca, and if it's Medinan, it was revealed in Medina. But this is actually not the case all the time. So I'm going to, inshallah, explain this to you. So you might want to take a couple of notes in regards to this, because I do recommend that you know the difference between a Meccan and a Medinan chapter, especially if you're planning on attending Sharia in the future. Like it's quite a big topic. So Meccan chapters are not necessarily chapters that are definitely revealed in Mecca. Most Meccan chapters are revealed in Mecca. However, this also refers to verses that were revealed prior to the migration of the Prophet ﷺ, you know, before the migration. The Prophet ﷺ, we said he spent 13 years of his preaching Islam in Mecca, and then the rest were in Medina, another 10 in Medina. So the Meccan chapters are, notice, very short, very short. They are not long, okay? And they're strong in approach in arguing with the disbelievers about their disbelief. For example, if you look at Juzz Amma, which is, remember, this is what we're looking at. We're going to be looking at Juzz Amma, you know. These chapters are all relatively really short. Actually, 24 of these chapters are under 20 verses long. So they're pretty short. Juzz Amma contains 37 chapters, and out of these, only 5 are Medinan chapters, making 32 Meccan. You don't have to memorize all these numbers, but just remember that the Meccan chapters, the ones that were, you know, Meccan means prior to Hijrah, and they're usually very short, and they revolve around arguing with the kuffar about their beliefs. You know, obviously they believed in more than one God, so it's always arguing about this topic. One of the chapters that are Medinan is Surah An-Nasr, which talks about Islam being victorious and many people entering Islam. This only happened once the Prophet ﷺ migrated to Medina and established an Islamic state, and this is why Surah An-Nasr is Medinan. So even though there are, like I said, a couple of exceptions in Juzz Amma, there are a couple of really short surahs. You know, إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحِ. This surah is really short, but it's actually Medinan because it talks about victory of Islam. And when was Islam victorious? Not in Mecca, it was in Medina. In Medina, there was an Islamic state. It was established. We had laws. We had government. So the surahs that talk about Islam being established and victorious and people coming to Islam in crowds are not Meccan, they're Medinan, even if the surah is very short. Another reason why Medinan chapters are short was because the disbelievers were not even interested in listening to the Quran. So the verses had to be really short enough to catch their attention. SubhanAllah, it's like today, in today's day and age, if you send someone a link of a lecture that's 1 hour long, this is what they'll do. They'll look at it and they'll say, I'll save it in my to-do list. And most of the time they don't actually watch it, okay? But if it's a 3 to 5 minute long, you know, little clip or TikTok or whatever it is, they'll be bothered to watch it. And sometimes shorter is better, especially when you have a audience that's not really ready to accept what you're saying, or if they're close to the topic at hand. And I would, you know, just like to remind you, subhanAllah, all the talks that the Prophet ﷺ gave, They were all relatively short, all of them. So the Prophet ﷺ, the longest lecture that he probably gave, okay, was in the farewell pilgrimage. And that went on for about, if you read the farewell pilgrimage lecture, like, it's not really a lecture, but it's only a couple of pages long, like maximum 15 minutes for that whole talk. And this was the farewell pilgrimage, and he was giving, you know, advice that he knew that he didn't have long to go, and he was giving the most important advice ever, Hajjatul Wada, and it was only about 15 minutes. So he knew, the Prophet ﷺ, he knew that in order to grab people's attention, you can't make it too long. You can for certain people that they're at a state where, you know, they're so eager to learn, they can sit down for a couple of hours. But majority of the time, when you're looking at a mixed audience, you can't have a lecture that's too long. This is why also, subhanAllah, I like the Zoom lessons, because a lot of you have little kids and it's really, really hard to like go and drive somewhere. I know how it feels. I drive to Lakemba. It's like, I remember when I drove with the two little ones, like, honestly, I would stop a couple of times on the way to breastfeed and change nappies. And by the time I got to class, I think I was all red and flustered. So I know how it feels. It's really, really hard. It's really hard. So, you know, alhamdulillah, you've been blessed with being able to listen to this at any time you want. Just say it gets boring after 20 minutes, you've zoned out. You could pause and you can listen to it again. You can have your earphones on. You can be doing the dishes. You can be, you know, making dinner, you know, feeding your baby. You know, alhamdulillah, this really, really does help. But generally speaking, when you're speaking to a mixed audience and they're all, you know, face to face, to grab people's attention for an hour or more, it's really, really hard. And that's why it's better to give short and sweet little pieces of advice. And on that note, just so you remember, like all the hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ, majority of them are really short. They're very straight to the point. Short bits of information is likely to stick in someone's mind more than a lengthy, detailed piece of advice. So, for example, there is a hadith where it says, "La taghdab." I remember, oh, subhanAllah, I can't forget this. I got this book from the Islamic bookstore, and it was called like little du'as that you can say for your children or teach your children. Anyway, one of them was "La taghdab," don't get angry. "La tahasadu," okay, don't get jealous. And my little son was just like walking around, "La taghdab, la tahasadu." But and I told him, what does that mean? He would actually tell me what it meant, because it was so short. It was so short. It even helped me when I was put on the spot to give, like, you know, a random little lesson to a bunch of little kids. I would just remember these little hadiths that I had remembered because they were so short. But if there is a really long hadith, it's very hard to remember all of it. So remember, short and sweet little pieces of advice are really, really good. Like that one, do not be angry, do not be jealous, or your mother, then your father. Everyone remembers that. Why? Because it's so short. Okay, so going back to the topic of Meccan verses, remember they revolved around the Tawheed. It means the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because the audience there were polytheists. And polytheists mean they worship Allah, but they worship more than Allah. They give Allah partners. Okay, so these verses had to revolve around Tawheed and argue and prove that Allah is one to the pagans, because the pagans, they actually believed in Allah, but they didn't single out Allah's worship. They believed that Allah was the ultimate God, but they gave Allah partners so that they would share in his dominion, as though he needs like a helper. It's very similar to the Christians. So they believe in God, but then they believe in the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. The Jews are the same thing. There is a sect of the Jews that believe that Uzair is the son of Allah. So that's why the polytheists, you know, the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims, something that we are similar in is that we believe in an ultimate God. We believe in an ultimate God, full stop. They believe in an ultimate God plus partners. That's the difference between us and them. And then the atheists, they don't believe in any God. And the agnostics, they are confused. They're not ruling out that there is a God, and they can't confirm that there is a God, and that is, disbelief as well. So Allah gives many parables to help tickle the intellect of the pagan worshippers, to remind them of the absurd nature of worshipping more than one God, or denying that Allah's existence altogether. So this was another kind of feature of the Quranic verses that were revealed in Mecca. They kept tickling the mind. Okay, for example, in the Quran, Allah gives the example of a servant worshipping many masters. Which master had the upper hand? So imagine that you are a slave and you have many masters. Allah is telling, imagine that, because we are servants, imagine we had many gods. Who do you listen to? What if one God has a fight with the other God? Like, who has the upper hand? So this is similar to the worshipping of more than one God. Which God had the upper hand and all the authority? And in another verse, Allah mentions, how could something come from nothing? Like, I want you to imagine, okay, because this is now talking to the people that disbelieved in Allah, because they majority were polytheists, but there were some that didn't believe in a God, or there were some that they believed in Allah, but they didn't believe in the Day of Judgment. So this is the argument that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, tickling their mind with. I want you to imagine that I bring a painting to you, like the Mona Lisa. And I say that this painting came out by itself. No one drew it, no one made the paper, no one made the paint, and then all of these materials were thrown in the air, and then kaboom, a Mona Lisa has been created. Okay? What would you think of me, Jinan? Would think, oh God, how crazy is she for bringing out the explanation of how that painting came to existence? How could that painting come to existence like that? So Allah mentions examples of how was it possible for this world to come about from nothing, and many other examples, like how could they all come from nothing? This is for those people who, they deny the existence of God altogether, like Ubay ibn Khalaf, who came to the Prophet ﷺ with a dry bone. He had a dry bone in his hand, and he crumbled it in his hand, and he scattered it. And he said, oh Muhammad, are you claiming that Allah will resurrect this? He's laughing, like, mocking. And the Prophet ﷺ said, yes, Allah, may he be exalted, will cause you to die, then he will resurrect you, and he will gather you in the hellfire. So, they were like, is Allah going to actually bring this bone, out of nothing? Another example where Allah gives is the creation of the fly. Okay, something that we consider it's a pest, and we don't give it any value. He reminds the disbelievers that if the fly snatches something away from them, they couldn't even get it off the fly. And this highlights how much we are in need of Allah, the one who created that fly in the first place. So that fly, where you consider it's just a pest, you can't even take that crumb off it if you tried. So these Meccan verses, they're generally addressing the people of Mecca. Most of them were disbelievers at the time. So Meccan verses were aimed at trying to convince people to accept Islam. And Medinan verses, we're going to talk about that soon, are addressed to an audience that have already accepted Islam. So if you are giving dawah to a non-Muslim, it's not the same as the dawah that you're giving to a Muslim. It's not the same dawah that you are giving to a Christian. Trying to convince a Christian of Islam is easier than other religions maybe, or other beliefs. Okay, so we have to learn about the approach that we use with different people. If someone believes in a God, like a Christian, it's easier to convince that there is, how could he have no partners? So you have to look at the audience that you're speaking to. Also, if you're speaking to a child, is it the same way where you are speaking to a 16-year-old? Is it the same way as you are speaking to a 60-year-old? Absolutely not. It's completely different. There's different respect level as well that you have to give to an older person. Teaching an older person something, it's a bit harder. It's harder because they're older than you. You don't want to show them that you know more than them. So you have to use the correct approach. And Meccan verses, they revolved around stories of the past, the Day of Judgment, the first man, Adam, how Allah created the heavens and the earth, Iblis's rebellion, and the past prophets, and all these kind of things. This is what the Meccan verses were looking at. And another example that I forgot to mention is, subhanAllah, if someone would say, how could something come from nothing? If the kuffar would say, how could these bones that are in the ground, that have turned to dust, how could something grow when there is deadness, there's death? You say to them, okay, look at the dead earth, a desert. Sometimes there are these seeds in there that are so dry that they are dead. They've been sitting in that dead earth for a century. I was watching a documentary once, and it was explaining this from non-Muslims. After so many years and centuries, water comes back to that dead earth, and subhanallah, that seed is moistened and it grows and it sprouts and it grows into a plant, into a tree when it was dead. So what about us? Why can we not be reproduced? Of course. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can create us, then He can recreate us. So I hope that gives you an understanding of what the Meccan chapters are talking about. So next time when you open up the Quran, it says Meccan, Medinan, remember it's not necessarily 100% talking about, is it revealed in Mecca or was it revealed in Medina? It's talking about, before Hijrah, after Hijrah, what are the topics that are involved, revolved around in this surah. Inshallah, next week we'll be looking at the Medinan chapters. And next week will be the last week before we start Surah Al-Fatiha. So I would recommend everyone for Surah Al-Fatiha, if you want to take this course seriously, get yourself a book and a pencil and get ready to start writing the verses in Arabic, okay? If you want to get tracing paper, get used to writing the verse in Arabic, make it nice and neat. Make sure that this hour, not next week, the week after, there is a bit of leniency now because you're just listening in, but use this hour to listen to the talk, listen to it recorded later, pause and re-listen, write down the verse in Arabic, the meaning in English, and then certain words that have an in-depth meaning, write some points about it. Because the point is that when you recite Quran in your salah, we want you to understand what you're saying. And we want you to have a connection with the Quran and with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you're just reading your salah and you have no idea what you are saying, how can you expect that you are having a connection with Allah? It's actually not possible. You need to know what you are saying. If my whole salah is in Chinese, how am I getting anything out of it? It's just a repetition and just a box that you tick that I have now done it, so I'm considered Muslim and I will eventually go to Jannah. But we want to get a high level of Jannah and we want to have a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so subhanak Allahumma wa bihamdik ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk, and inshallah we'll see you all next week.